Dear friends, this is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey and our discussions with respect to the feature film works made by this brilliant and extraordinary filmmaker and artist who is Theo Angelopoulos. Now, I am in no way an expert when it comes to the works of Angelopoulos. I am in no way an expert when it comes to the cinema of Greece, and I am in no way an expert regarding social and political history of Greece, contemporary and classical. And so I am in I have very little, I have no expertise at all, in fact. And so my comments will be very shallow and will be very limited. And so I apologize very profusely and very deeply in advance. And I also welcome I really welcome anyone who has a grasp and understanding of these current and relevant themes of society and history and the cinema of Greece in the context of discussions of the works of Angelopoulos. So if you find yourself in that position and you find yourself frustrated with anything that I say due to my own lack of knowledge, please, I welcome your comments, and please let me know in the comment section below, and please teach me and please guide me in terms of my own journey into the world of Angelopoulos, because as I say, his films, among many things, or they do many things, and one of those things is they are very, I think, magical and very powerful and very profound cinematic expressions of the ebb and flow of history. This ebb and flow of history is both current to the times in which the films are made, and also they are speaking to the subject matters of the stories that they are trying to tell. And so there's a type of parallel structure that occurs where, however, the more one thinks about it, the more one becomes a student of these particular fields of history. I think the more one realizes too that sometimes those structures of parallel observation might not necessarily hold, or perhaps to be even more specific or to describe it in a different way, history is perhaps more complex than meets the eye. And I think that's part of the reason why the works of Angelopoulos shine the way they do, that they illuminate in this way that also gives us a sense of the complex and a sense of the unknown and a sense of the frustrating, and also the sense of the human and the humane, and the tragic and the struggle and the real heart and soul that is at the very foundational essence of his works, Angelopoulos, the great works of Theo Angelopoulos. Now that brings us to the work which was from 1972, and it is known in English as Days of 36. So this film, Days of 36, is focusing in on a particular period or particular situations or circumstances in this year of 1936, or specifically, I understand, the summer period around April or May, I think, of 1936. Now, this is very important too, because it also touches upon, I think quite directly, the political implications of the ruling regime at the time of summer of 1936, leading up to the very key month of August 1936 in Metaxas. But I'll get to that momentarily. But Days of 36, therefore, we return to this particular point in time and place in Greek history. And we find opening the film a gathering of some sort, a rally or a demonstration of some sort that involves the public speaking of a person that we understand later through information that is revealed to us. We assume that this is a politician, a public figure of some sort. All of a sudden, in the opening moments of the film, he dies, and the implication being that he has been shot, the implication being that he has been murdered, assassinated in this very abrupt and tragic fashion. We also understand through events that are revealed to us immediately after this sequence that an individual, a man who is named Sopianos, has been arrested, and he is being held prisoner in a cell in a prison complex in Greece. And the idea or the understanding that we come to as viewers is that he is standing accused of the murder, the assassination of this figure, this public figure that we see in the opening moment. So this forms the backbone of the story, Days of 36. But as those of you who know the film know, that's not where it ends. In fact, this is its only beginning, because the official line is that he is arrested, he is going to stand trial for the murder of this politician, but as he is in his cell, he receives a visitor. He receives a visitor of someone who we understand later to be a politician, an elected official, a member, an MP, Mr. Croesus. And this politician visits Sophianos in his cell. And then suddenly we come to understand through information as it's revealed to us, the viewer, that Sophianos has somehow or another gotten his hands on a gun, and he has taken this politician who has been visiting him in his cell. He takes this politician hostage in his cell, and he makes specific demands to the persons in charge, using leverage that is engendered by this hostage crisis situation. And therein lies the crux of this film in terms of the plot dynamics, because we see through various strands of subplot and character development, we see various characters respond or react to the situation depending on where they are. For example, we see the subplot involving the person that we understand to be the brother of the political prisoner, the brother of Sophianos, who also happens to be the driver of the MP who is later the subject of this hostage crisis. So there is already this sense of a close-knit relationship web that is either explained or hinted at, or not so much, depending on one's perspective or outtake of this film. And I'll get to that idea in the moment, that perspective as well, later on in the discussion, the way in which this film reveals information or doesn't reveal information. This is a very key point. But in any event, we have one strand of subplot involving the brother, and maybe there might be bits of information, facts, that could lead to the possibility of clearing Sophianos' name, because maybe the official line being Sophianos has killed, has assassinated this figure. Maybe that's not true at all. Maybe the truth is something completely different. And so Sophianos' brother wants to, we understand, try to get at the bottom of, get at the heart of the matter, get at the truth of the matter, and hopefully clear his brother's name, and get the involvement of someone that we understand is an attorney, a defense attorney, someone who will try to put up a case, build a case to defend Sophianos against the government's argument that he is a political assassin. And here's one line of subplot that we see. We follow the brother, and we follow, thus by extension, this attorney who is also acting as a type of investigator, a type of detective, trying to find witnesses, trying to piece together a case to defend Sophianos, and trying to find anyone who might have any information as to what exactly happened. Did Sophianos really kill this politician, or did he not? And anyone who has information that is contrary to the so-called official government line is, of course, being sought after by the allies of Sophianos and company. That includes a character named Lucas, who we see very briefly at the start of the film, prior to, or immediately prior to, the arrest of Sophianos by government authorities. And we see how this character of Lucas and the brother and the attorney, how they intertwine, and there are other characters that we meet along the way, and that might or might not lead to a further investigation as to what exactly happened, the truth of the matter. And it is a, a sudden and moving and also very elliptical and quite challenging and very also shocking series of events that we see unfurl or unfold in this particular subplot line. So that's one example of how the events of Sophianos and the hostage situation are affecting those immediately around him. Another group that is being affected by this hostage situation is the powers that be, the people in charge, the warden, the military officials, the guards, the police enforcement structures, and then indeed also the higher echelons of power in government, ministerial levels, and indeed we get wind of the prime minister through what is told to us by the minister character here. We understand that this issue or this crisis has reached the highest levels of government in terms of legislative body debate between the Conservative Party side and also the Liberal Democratic side. And we understand that the Liberal Party side wants to not give in to the demands of the hostage taker, whereas the Conservative Party side wants to give in to the demands. And this leads to the potential political crisis of the ruling regime. And so therefore, this crisis, this crisis of what seems to be an immediate prison complex crisis, has with it implications that are reaching the highest levels of power. So this is a very interesting, to say the least, a series of events that is unfolding before our very eyes. Also, we have, too, related to this, how this event affects the people around Sophianos and company. We also see, too, the immediate events of, say, the people who are trying to clear his name, the people that are close to him, his associates. That's one aspect. We also see the people in power, how they are affected as well. Also, in relation to both of these camps, we also see a third and also quite chilling and frightening way in which this event is affecting the world around him. In other words, through the series of events that we are witness to as viewers of this film, we come to realize that the political machine that is maybe on the one hand seemingly inept or seemingly maybe incompetent on the one hand, also is operating in ways that are very frightening, that seem to be curtailing and eroding concepts of principles of democracy, rule of law, the right of prisoners, etc. And the consequences are quite dire and quite frightening and chilling and sinister indeed. And so we have not just the power structures that are being affected, not just the immediate close circle of Sophianos that are being affected, but also the implications of the film are that the actual core structures of democracy are also being affected. And that leads to, I think, very chilling echoes and very scary echoes that I think can reach even contemporary viewers. And I say contemporary, I mean contemporary not just in the times of the film, 1972, but also the times that people are watching the film even now. So, and that level of discourse with history that this film and Angelopoulos and company seem to be engaged in when we are talking about a film like Days of 36. These multi-level discourses with history, I think, go such a long way because we see certain echoes or parallels or maybe arguments against such parallels when we consider the times in which this film was made in 1972 and the political regime structure that was in place at that time, what's known as the regime of the colonels and the military ruling regime from the late 1960s into the early 1970s, on the one hand, in which this film is made, and also the subject matter of the film, namely this period in 1936. We understand it's prior to, but leading very closely to what is known as the August 1936 establishment of the authoritarian regime of the then Prime Minister of Greece, Metaxas, and his what is often described as authoritarian rule from August 1936 into the advent or the start of the Second World War. So, These parallel tracks, or maybe not so parallel tracks, depending on your take in history, I think are also at play when we have a consideration not just of the subject matter of the film, not just the context in which the film was made, but also the way in which this film seems to be dealing in a very, I think, core and artistic and very, on the one hand, poetic way, but also very direct way, with this idea of the core concepts of democracy and how they seem to be eroding before our very eyes when we're watching this film, Days of 36. So let me just turn to a very maybe basic discussion of the themes that I've tried to touch upon in the first half of this video discussion. So, as I was mentioning earlier, I marvel at how this film and Angelopoulos's command over the cinematic craft, how he is able to show us information but also not show us information. And this idea of the ellipsis, the elliptical nature, the things that are withheld or the things that are revealed to us, and the implications of such. So I think there are two fundamental ways in which this ebb and flow, this revealing and withholding of information, is shown in the context of Days of 36. So first off, we have the way in which the film is edited together, scenes that are edited together or even composed. Well, let's talk about the editing first. Sometimes we have a sequence that seems to be showing us bits of information that we can follow from a certain, say, plot development perspective. But then suddenly we are treated to, say, a cut to another scene that seems to be dealing with something quite different, or maybe something has been skipped over, or something that has happened of certain significance between the end of the first scene and then the start of the second scene. So something that has happened in the concept of the edit and hasn't been revealed to us, but still is of dire consequence and is somehow or another affecting the very plot developments of the film. So in other words, the film shows us through certain sequences things of information, but then it withholds when it cuts away or it cuts to a different scene, or in fact, it refers to something that happens off screen, and we understand this by dialogue or bits of phrases that are spoken by characters on screen, etc. But in other words, some key events are not shown to us directly. Case in point, the actual, say, hostage crisis starting point is something where we as viewers are in the hallway, but we are never, or I mean, we are in the cell sometimes, but we are not in the cell at this precise moment when this hostage crisis comes about to begin with. We hear it, or we think we understand what's going on, but everything is happening behind the door. And so what happens, we're not sure. How did he get the gun? Sofianos, how did he get the gun? We're not sure. What was the interaction between the politician and the prisoner just prior to or leading up to this hostage crisis situation to begin with? We're not sure. And what is the relationship between the two of them? We're not sure. What is the relationship between him and the brother, the driver, and others? We're not sure. Why were there comments from the warden when he's talking to the state prosecutor outside in the courtyard there? Why does he mention the fact that maybe Chrysis was showing certain attempts at giving favoritism towards this political prisoner, which is why he was treated a little bit differently, or quite differently, than the rest of the prisoners in this prison complex? What was the reason for that, etc.? So we're not sure. We get a sense of what might be. Maybe there was some kind of relationship between them, we're not sure. Maybe there was some kind of bond between them, we're not sure. Who gave the gun? How did he get access to the gun? We're not sure. Was it the politician? Was it the brother? Again, we're not sure. We are not sure. Now, let's take the gun. The gun is a very key aspect because this forms the basis, not just of the government's action against Sofianos, but also, we understand later, the government's action or its attempts at action against Sofianos' brother. So the gun, it becomes a key point. But how did it emerge? What were the facts that led to this particular piece of evidence being so crucial in the way it is? Again, we are not sure. We think we know. We hear the government line, the official government story. We think we have an idea of what might happen. There are characters that also are trying to get at the truth as to what happened, but ultimately it is unclear. And it is unclear because of a number of reasons, one of which being the fact that Angelopoulos and company are withholding information. They're revealing it, but they're also withholding information. They're withholding it even within the shot. And so that becomes, I think, a great example, a very powerful and vivid example of how elusive truth is. What is the truth? We are not sure, and we perhaps will never know what happened. Who gave access to the gun? Who gave access, or who gave Sofianos access to the gun? What is their relationship? What happened to Lucas? How was it that Sofianos was arrested? Who killed this politician to begin with? Was it Sofianos, or according to Sofianos, he denies ever having killed a politician to begin with? So if he didn't do it, who did? What was the situation that led to the opening moments of the film? Again, it is unclear. It is unclear. So this becomes, I think, a very powerful way that this film deals with the frightening nature of the elusive nature of truth. And I say frightening because it is the search for truth that we see a number of characters embark upon in this film. And throughout the film, we see the many challenges and indeed dangers to their very lives and existences by virtue of the fact that they're trying to get at the truth. And this comes about also because it seems that the search for truth seems to be going head against the official government line. And so that leads to yet another wrinkle into the complexity of this film, namely how the government line seems to be trying to obfuscate or otherwise blur or hide or diminish or destroy any concepts of truth. But therein lies another complex wrinkle or a nuanced wrinkle, because if we don't know the nature of truth to begin with, how do we know that the government line is either false or true? Again, we are not sure. And so this creates the sense of mystery. This creates a sense of unease and not being sure of what is going on. Now, this adds to the suspense and tension of the film as a cinematic work, as a suspense work, as a work that is about, or seems to be about, the dangers of the eroding principles of democracy in the face of a type of authoritarian regime, in the metaphor of this prison complex hostage crisis. But the frightening aspect of this is that we are not sure. We are not sure. And this is, I think, further augmented by the fact that even the camera work, I said too, that sometimes information is shown to us, but also not shown to us within the very shot itself, the way that characters are staged, the way that we are in corridors rather than in rooms. We are outside in the courtyard rather than inside. We can't see exactly because the glass of the windows is covered in this white covering that makes us, we can see the silhouette when it's lit from inside, but we can't see the actual details of who is inside the cell, etc. When we hear or when we see the certain officials trying to figure out what to do, sometimes we're in the room with them, but other times maybe they're meeting outside in the courtyard from a great distance and the camera's here. We don't know exactly what they're saying. Sometimes we see the brother, Sofianos' brother, talking with the lawyer in the halls outside of in a courthouse. We hear a little bit of what they're saying, but we're not sure. And we also hear something of what they say in an empty courtroom. But we also understand that maybe they're being overheard by other people, and that might lead to some very dangerous plot developments indeed for the brother and for the attorney, etc. And so these, this idea of tension, this idea of paranoia, and this idea of being watched also leads to this sense of unease and lack of balance, feeling off balance. And I think that is a very effective way in which this film operates on the viewer. And as I say, the camera work is such that it is sometimes held in a distance. And so we cannot necessarily hear what is being spoken because something is held off in a distance. Maybe something is happening in the far corners. Some kind of plot is being hatched. Some kind of conspiracy is being undertaken. Sometimes we hear those conversations occur, yes, but other times we don't hear those conversations. So that is also an example of things that are revealed, things that are withheld. And that ebb and flow of revelation and withholding creates a sense of tension and paranoia and unease indeed. And I think that is an ultimate way of expressing the metaphor of the elusivity of truth and how that affects, or how that has in somehow or another connected with the erosion of various democratic principles that is at the very heart of this. Now, speaking of the erosion of democratic principles, another way that this film can be seen, or arguably can be seen, is, as I mentioned or hinted at in the first part of this video, the way in which it seems to be having a dialogue with various levels of history. So the first level is in the context of the subject matter of the film itself, namely the year 1936, the Metaxas regime. He is at this time, May 1936, he is already established as the prime minister. However, and of course, I'm not a student of Greek history, but I understand that it was a very complex set of events leading up to 1935 and the start of 1936, and the elections and the results of such elections leading to the need to establish this rule that first had Metaxas named as the Minister of War, and then later in the summer, Prime Minister. And then leading up to August 1936 and the establishment, or the overthrow, and the transformation into the authoritarian regime of Metaxas, leading into the events of World War II, excuse me. And so this period that the film takes place in is at this point just prior to the turn into the August 1936 authoritarian regime of Metaxas. Although we can see, or the argument is being made, I think, that the erosion of the democratic principles leading into or transforming into the authoritarian rule, I think, is on display by virtue of the various characters in power, in authority that we see here. We see them, for example, trying to deal with the crisis situation in ways that are maybe within the framework of democratic principles, rule of law, etc., right of prisoners, etc. But slowly, or maybe not so slowly, we see how those are being usurped and those are being eroded. We see, or we get a sense of abuse of power. We also get a sense of the harshness of police enforcement authority. And also we get a sense of how the authorities seem to be spying on the population, leading to various very sad and very tragic events of specific characters that we meet. And also the people in charge are trying desperately to solve this situation, and they are failing. That might lead one to view these people in power as being incompetent or inept, but perhaps also we see them as being much more dangerous, because the more they fail, the more they are panicked, and the more that they are panicked, the more drastic that they are willing to go in order to solve this situation, in order to end this political hostage crisis. And the choices that they make ultimately lead to some very frightening consequences indeed. So that, I think, can be said to be a type of metaphor for the erosion of democratic principles that will lead into what could be said to be the authoritarian regime that will come just a few weeks after the events of Days of 36. And so that, I think, is a very important point to keep in mind. Now, another historical dialogue that this film could be said to be having is also in terms of the contemporary times in which the film is being made, 1972, and the regime of the colonels from the late 1970s into the in the late 1960s into the early 1970s, and how this is also a type of military regime during the period of Angelopoulos' early filmmaking pursuits. Now, I understand too that on the one hand, there is this dialogue that could emerge in terms of the way in which historians can view the Metexas regime on the one hand and the regime of the colonels from the late 1960s into the early 1970s on the other. So 1936 and 1972 as being parallel points that I think this film is probably trying to draw. Now, on the one hand, that I understand that type of discussion can be made. On the other hand, I understand too that there might be some room for debate and discussion as to how truly strong that parallel view of history holds up. Or maybe it's much more complex and much more nuanced than meets the eye. In any event, I think that this film posits the argument that yes, indeed, there could be this type of parallel view of history, namely the erosion of democratic principles leading into a type of authoritarian regime or rule that will have the potential of destroying the lives of the people, the individuals that are the subject of the story here, might find some parallels in the regime of the colonels of the early 1970s that Angelopoulos and company are trying to make films like Days of 36. So regardless of, or whether or not that parallel truly holds, in any event, the film seems to be creating that side of the debate or discussion. So in that way, too, we can say that this film is having parallel or maybe multiple discourses in terms of the social, historical context of Greek history, both in terms of 1936 and also 1972. And indeed, I should say, too, that there are echoes of classical Greek history. There is a reference made to the foundation of an Olympic stadium and the glory that the minister or politicians want to preserve for its athletes, etc. And there's a ceremony that seems to be a somewhat maybe not fictitious, but maybe somewhat a show type of ceremony that maybe has a certain lack of substance. But in any event, there is a show ceremony that seems to be harkening back to the days of classical history in the idea of the glory days of the athletes and the Olympics, etc. But question or query whether that is indeed an authentic show or maybe it is just another facade that politicians of the day, in the context of the film, are using in order to further or fuel their own roots of power. And in fact, those roots of power seem to be further divided, or there's a gulf that seems to be ever more widening between those figures of authority on the one hand and the citizenry, the people, on the other. And I think it's hinted at in scenes like this. It's also, I think, very strongly suggested in another very famous scene in the film involving the prison complex authority figures trying to quiet a type of revolt of the prisoners, and they are expressing their dismay and indeed their resistance by clanging against the bars of the cells. And the clanging is so overwhelming to be deafening. And so this becomes a battle of wits and a battle of wills between the prisoners, who could be said to be the citizenry or the population on the one hand, and the figures of authority who are trying to quash or quell this on the other. And what will they do in order to win out in the end? And so this becomes, I think, a very potent and powerful and quite frightening in terms of not just the metaphor and how it's placed, but also its conclusion in the context of the film. And so this idea of the ever-widening gulf between the rulers in the regime and then the people who are quote-unquote being ruled. And so we get hints of this as well. And I think one can apply that, or at least one can at least have a discussion in terms of how appropriate that application of the widening gulf between the populace and the regime is in the context of a discussion of the historical fabric of 1936 and then also the historical fabric of 1972 and the immediate surrounding environs of those particular years. So this is my very long-winded way of saying that this film is incredibly embedded and multi-layered with a type of structure that is speaking, I think, to many time periods as well as many facets of, say, a type of examination or erosion of certain specific democratic principles in the context of this story that, as I say, has ramifications that echo throughout many levels as expressed in this film, both immediate in terms of family and also the halls of, say, of justice and the courts and the attorneys, but also the prison structure, the warden, the military advisors or the military personnel, the guards and the police enforcement persons, and also the higher levels of power leading up to the ministerial levels, conservative party persons, and then the prime minister himself. And indeed also there is a hint of how there is certain implications of how certain government domestic structures are relating to international interests as well. There's a very interesting scene involving a gathering on a beachfront, and I think this is hinted at in terms of just how far things are being affected, because indeed during this period of the 1930s, and specifically 1936, one of the key issues was how Greece would be relating to the outside world in terms of its diplomatic and also its economic relations vis-a-vis the Balkan states and also vis-a-vis Germany. And so this was a key issue that divided the various figures of political power, including Metaxas at the time. And so I think this is hinted at in terms of how Greece, as a nation, is relating to certain power structures and interests outside of Greece, so internationally. And so that means that the implication is that this one incident, this one hostage crisis, has ramifications that echo throughout time and space and society and politics. And it's all expressed in this incredibly powerful and poetic way in the hands of Angelopoulos and company. This is the work Days of 36. And before I go, I should mention that the screenplay, Days of 36, is credited to Theo Angelopoulos and Petros Markaris and Thanasis Valtinos and Stratis Karas, and cinematography by Yorgos Arbanaitis. And so please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation, but I hope you can forgive me. And of course, also I should mention to the director, who is Theo Angelopoulos. This is the work from 1972, Days of 36. Okay, my friends, so thank you so much. And once again, I invite and welcome anyone who is interested to drop me a line or a comment to share with me your own thoughts and comments about this work or the works of Angelopoulos, or just adding more information about this particular period or periods of history. That will also be continuing on in other works by Angelopoulos. I should mention that this is a key aspect in a lot of the films, especially this film and other films that we will be talking about immediately after. The next film being The Traveling Players. So I hope to see you at the next discussion of the works of Angelopoulos. Finally, too, I should mention that this is the Artificial Eye DVD that is, I think, as of now, the time of this video, out of print or very, very difficult to get, or maybe it's on the used market or something along those lines. But Artificial Eye came out with these sets, these DVD sets from the UK that were, I think, 3 sets in all, that had all the Angelopoulos works on physical media, this being one of the films from the first of those sets. Now, I will be so happy if and when the works of Angelopoulos become more readily available, accessible in either physical media or streaming services or whatever the case may be. So I welcome that day if and when it comes. I hope it is soon. I hope it is very, very soon. And so if you have not had the chance to see this film, Days of 36, or other films by Angelopoulos, and if it's difficult to find this or track this film down at the moment, please, I am with you. I hope that his films will become more available. So if anyone is listening, I don't know if anyone is listening, but just in case someone is out there who is listening and you are trying to find the works of Angelopoulos, just please note that I know that there are discs out there. Maybe they're hard to find. Just so I hope that you can find a solution in terms of tracking down these films. But whatever the case may be, hopefully someday in the future, and I hope that day is very soon, that most, if not all, of his works, Angelopoulos' works, will be made very available in releases that can be accessed by all, including this work from '72, which is the film Days of 36. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.